Dawn broke like an ember across the desert, the horizon painted in fire and dust. A single rider moved through the stillness, his shadow long against the brittle earth. Luke Callan rode slow, the reins loose in his hands, his hat pulled low to keep out the rising sun. The horse beneath him, Ghostwind, was the last of a once proud herd. Together, they crossed the land like two survivors who'd learned to speak without words. The drought had stripped the valley bare. Fences leaned, wells coughed up dust, and every hoofprint Luke left seemed to sink deeper than it should. He had buried his wife under the lone cedar by the ridge 3 winters ago, the wind still catching her name on the wooden cross. Since then, the world had grown smaller, reduced to the ranch, the horse, and the silence between. That morning, while mending the east fence, Luke heard it, a faint cry carried on the wind, too soft to be animal, too human to ignore. He stood still, hand on the worn handle of his hammer, listening. The sound came again, weaker now. He followed it through the scrub, boots crunching on dry soil, until the land opened into a shallow creek bed. 2 figures huddled in the shade of a rock ledge. Children. One sat upright, dark hair tangled with sand, her arms around a smaller girl who lay motionless, lips cracked and bleeding. Both wore torn deerskin dresses, and no shoes. Their skin was sunburnt, their eyes wide with fear. Luke stopped several paces away, raising his hand slowly. "I ain't here to harm you," he said. The older one flinched, her gaze flicking toward a small knife half buried in dust. He nodded toward it, but didn't move closer. "Keep it if it helps you breathe easier." He took off his canteen and set it down between them. Then he stepped back. The older girl hesitated, then reached out, lifting it to the younger's lips. Water spilled down her chin as she drank. The sound of it, the gasp, the swallow, felt louder than the wind itself. "Name's Luke," he said quietly. "You girls got family nearby?" No answer, just the older one's stare, dark, unreadable. He saw both defiance and desperation there, a fight too old for her years. When the younger stirred, whispering a word he couldn't catch, Luke knelt a little closer. "She's sick," he murmured. "Needs rest, maybe food." He opened his satchel and placed 2 biscuits and a strip of jerky beside the rock. The older girl didn't thank him, but her trembling hands reached for the food anyway. When she tore the biscuit in half to share, something inside Luke eased, like a knot loosening after years. They stayed in silence until the light shifted gold. Luke didn't ask what had happened, though he suspected enough. The signs were clear. Burn marks on their dresses, smoke still faint on the northern wind. Somewhere, soldiers had ridden through the night, and these 2 had run until the desert nearly swallowed them whole. When it was time to leave, Luke stood by Ghostwind, hand resting on the reins. "You can't walk the miles ahead," he said softly. "Take him. He knows his way through dry country." The older girl blinked, confusion mixing with fear. "You give horse." He nodded. "He's yours now. Just get her to safety." She hesitated, then lifted the smaller girl onto the saddle. Before climbing up, she looked back once, long enough for him to see tears that didn't fall. Luke watched them ride toward the horizon, the white horse gleaming against the dying light. When the desert swallowed their shapes, he felt the ache settle in his chest. Not regret, but the strange peace that comes when a man gives what he cannot spare. He turned back toward the empty corral, the wind tugging at his hat brim. The silence followed him home, but it sounded different now. Less like loneliness, more like a prayer answered somewhere he couldn't yet see. The morning after they were gone, the ranch felt hollow in its quiet. Luke stood in the doorway, mug of coffee cooling between his hands, watching the light stretch across the barren corral. The gate hung open, the rope halter swaying like a ghost whisper in the wind. Ghostwind's prints were still fresh in the sand, and beside them, smaller, uneven tracks that ended where the horizon began. He followed them for a while, out past the fence line, until they vanished in the dry wash. When he turned back, the valley seemed wider than it had the day before. He spent the morning in motion just to keep the silence from closing in, fixed a trough that didn't need fixing, stacked fence posts that would never be used. The barn smelled of hay and dust, of sweat left behind by the horse that would never return. Every sound, the creak of rope, the flutter of a sparrow, carried an ache he couldn't name. At midday, he sat beneath the cedar by his wife's grave, the wooded, weathered gray, her name almost worn smooth by the wind. He traced the letters with his thumb. "You'd have liked them," he said softly. "Wild little things full of fire." His voice cracked, and the desert swallowed a whole. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small keepsake, a silver locket, dented from years of being carried close. Inside was a strand of her hair, still bound by a thread. He turned it between his fingers, thinking of the life that had drained from this land since she passed, of the mistakes that had followed, the cavalry raid, the smoke, the cries he could still hear when the nights turned too long. Helping those girls had stirred old ghosts, but had also quieted them. He hadn't expected that. Maybe mercy didn't erase sin, but it softened its edges. By late afternoon, clouds gathered in the west, thin at first, then swelling black with dust and storm. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain. Luke went inside to secure the shutters, the boards groaning under his hands. Then the storm came, sudden and fierce, rattling the roof like rifle fire. Inside the cabin, the lamp flickered. He sat by it with his journal open, pen trembling as he wrote words he hadn't found in years. They were just children. Maybe all of us are, in the eyes of something greater. Lightning flashed, throwing his reflection against a window. An old man who'd once been a soldier, now just trying to remember how to live. When the storm finally passed, he stepped outside. The air was cool, washed clean, the ground trembling faintly with distant thunder. He stood for a long moment, letting the rain drip from his hat brim. Then he noticed it. Tracks. Not the faint ones from morning, but new ones. Heavy, deep, they led toward the ridge, a half-circle pattern carved into wet soil. Hooves, many of them. Luke crouched low, fingers brushing the edges. The prints were fresh. Too fresh. He rose slowly, the weight of unease pressing into his chest. Ghostwind's prints were there too, faint beneath the rest. His heart tightened. The girls had made it through the storm, but they weren't alone anymore. He walked back to the house, every step echoing louder than the wind. Inside, he doused the lamp and stood in darkness, listening. Somewhere beyond the hills, he thought he heard the faint murmur of drums, or maybe it was just the heartbeat of the earth. Either way, it was moving closer. At dawn, the sky glowed the color of blood and copper. Luke sat on the porch, rifle resting across his knees, not from fear, but from knowing. The wind carried a low hum of hooves, distant yet certain, like a promise coming home. He looked out across the open plain and whispered to the morning, "So it begins." Then he smiled, a small, weary cur that held no regret at all. The sound came first, low, rhythmic, gathering strength as it rolled through the valley. Luke rose from the porch as the first rays of dawn cut across the plains. The earth itself seemed to tremble, carrying the thunder of hooves from beyond the ridge. He stood still, eyes narrowing against the light, watching shapes emerge through the lifting dust. Riders, a line of them, dark against the sunrise, moving with deliberate silence. Apache warriors. He felt no fear, only a hollow calm. The rifle rested by the doorway, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he stepped down from the porch and walked toward the open field, his boots sinking into the damp soil left by last night's rain. His heartbeat matched the rhythm of their approach. Ghost Twin's pale shape flashed among them, alive, strong, carrying the older girl before the rest. Relief flickered through him, brief as the glint of metal in sunlight. The riders fanned out in a half-circle before him. Dust swirled between them, rising in veils that turned the dawn into smoke. At their center rode a tall man on a black horse, a face carved in stone, eyes steady and unreadable. Beaded ornaments hung from his shoulders, and a single feather trembled in his hair. The girls were behind him now, safe but silent. Luke lifted his hand in quiet greeting. "I reckon you're their father." The man said nothing at first. The air hung still, the distance between them charged like the pause before a storm. Then he dismounted. When his boots hit the ground, the others followed his lead, a dozen warriors dismounting in unison. It was not a threat. It was ceremony. The chief walked closer. "You gave him your horse," he said in measured English. his voice low, heavy with the cadence of someone used to being obeyed. "I did," Luke replied. "They needed him more than I did." The chief studied him, his gaze unblinking. "You were a white soldier once." Luke hesitated, then nodded. "Long time ago." Something in the chief's expression shifted. Not anger, not forgiveness, but a weighing of truths. He gestured toward the girls. "They speak of you, the man who gave water when others gave bullets." Tala, the older one, slid down from Ghostwind's back and stood beside her father. Her small hand brushed the horse's neck before she looked up at Luke. "He helped us," she said softly. "He gave us life." A long silence followed. The wind picked up, stirring the edges of the chief's coat and Luke's hat brim. Two men stood facing the weight of generations. Sins neither had begun, debts neither could fully repay. Then the chief spoke again. "A gift cannot be repaid with words." He turned and signaled one of his men. The warrior led forward a young bay colt, its coat gleaming red gold in the light. The animal tossed its head, strong and unbroken. The chief placed the reins in Luke's hands. "This one is called Spirit Son. He was to be my own mount. Now he is yours." Luke's throat tightened. He ran a rough hand along the colt's neck, feeling its warmth, its pulse. "You don't owe me this," he said quietly. The chief met his gaze. "A man's worth is not in what he keeps, but what he gives when he has nothing left." Ghost wind stamped the ground beside them, nostrils flaring. The girls smiled faintly, shadows of gratitude flickering across their faces. The warriors remounted one by one, silent as the wind that carried them here. Before he left, the chief inclined his head once. "We will remember you, Luke Callan." Luke watched them ride toward the horizon, the rising sun painting their silhouettes in gold. Ghost wind turned his head once before vanishing into the light, his white mane bright as flame. When the last echo of hooves faded, Luke stood alone in the field, his hands resting on the new reins. Around him, the valley exhaled, the silence not empty but alive. He looked up at the sky, breathed deep, and whispered, "Then I'll remember you too." The days that followed moved slow, like wind over stone. Luke rose each morning before the sun, the world around him still soft with mist. The new colt, Spirit Son, waited by the corral gate, restless but unafraid. It had taken days to earn his trust, but patience was something Luke had learned in hard ways. Each morning, he approached with calm steps, letting the horse breathe him in, letting the silence between them speak what words could not. Trust, he had learned, was never taken, only offered. He kept the chief's words close. A man's worth is not in what he keeps, but what he gives when he has nothing left. They echoed whenever the wind rose through the grass, whenever he caught sight of Ghostwind's empty stall. At night, he would sit by the fire with his wife's locket open on his knee, the flicker of flame glinting against the silver, the weight of years pressing gentle instead of cruel. One afternoon, while oiling the coat saddle, Luke noticed a small leather pouch tied beneath the strap. He loosened it carefully and found a folded piece of deerskin inside, marked with dark ink in an unfamiliar hand. He unfolded it, heart steady, breath held. The words were simple but sure. To the one who gave without asking. "My daughters live because of your mercy. The horse you now keep was born of the same wind that guards our people. We name you White Hawk, the man who rides for no tribe yet carries the heart of one. When the sky burns red, remember that the land remembers you." Luke read it twice, the second time slower, tracing each line with a callous thumb. The words sank deep, like rain after drought. He folded the letter again and walked to the cedar tree where his wife rested, kneeling beside the weathered cross. He tucked the pouch into the earth at its base. "You see," he murmured, "turns out kindness circles back, even out here." The wind stirred the branches, a soft rustle that sounded almost like her laughter. Seasons turned. The valley breathed again. Sparse rain coaxed green from the dust, and the creek that once lay dry began to whisper. Spirit Son grew strong and sleek, his coat darkening in the sun. Luke trained him with patience, voice low and steady, hand firm but kind. By summer, the colt followed him without rope, shadow to his step. Some evenings he'd ride out past a ridge, toward the creek where he'd first found the girls. He'd sit there as the light faded, the water glimmering with gold. Sometimes on the far horizon, he thought he saw faint smoke rising, a campfire, perhaps, or the sign of a tribe passing through. He never went closer, but he always tipped his hat in quiet greeting. One morning, he woke before dawn and saddled Spirit Sun. The world was pale with mist, the air cool and still. He rode slow toward the ridge, the same trail Ghost Wind once took, the same silence wrapping the land in its breath. At the crest, he stopped and looked out, miles of open desert stretching beneath a sky painted in rose and amber. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a faint smile, he whispered, "Guess we made it, old friend." The wind rose gently, carrying the scent of rain and cedar. It brushed against his face like a benediction. He turned the horse toward home, the sun lifting behind him, warm and steady. In the distance, the valley shimmered with life again, the fences mended, the land forgiving. He didn't need much now. The earth, the sky, the memory of two small hands clutching reins at dusk. That was enough. As the ranch came into view, Luke slowed the colt to a walk, the sound of hooves soft against the waking ground. A single line of smoke curled from his chimney, thin and silver, rising straight into the morning light. If this story touched you, his voice might have said to the silence, share it with someone who still believes in kindness. These stories matter.